some people are going to come in while we're here, because there was about 70 people signed up. But this is a good group. So I'm Thomas Newville, and I am over in Educational Foundations, and I also teach I do special education courses. I also do disability study courses, and recently we've started a program called Career and Life Studies. You know, you got Latino studies, you got African American studies, you got women's studies, we got career and life studies. And this is a program that people with intellectual disabilities attend Millersville, which is in the conversation of equality or inequality. It is a radical concept in many instances, especially that they've been admitted. So we admitted the first person with an intellectual disability to ever be admitted to a state system university. And cool, yeah. And so next fall, we're going to admit 6 more residentially. But I got to wondering what was going on in the world, and I was looking for some international kind of flavor, because this is, after all, an international conference. And you know, I saw an article, one fellow with Down syndrome had graduated from a university in Peru, but that was all. And then I remembered my old friend Bruce Uditsky, who you know, we think we're all new and we're bragging about it, what we're doing and such. But Bruce here, who is the Chief Executive Officer, I have his bio here, so I'll read a couple of things from it. But he's the CEO up in Alberta, and it's the Alberta Association for Community Living, and he is recognized as an international advocate and leader in community inclusion, and serves on all sorts of governmental bodies, and really been instrumental in developing innovative programs throughout Canada. And they started their post-secondary, inclusive post-secondary education program over 30 years ago. 30 years. And so when it comes to who in the world really started this, it was Bruce. And so I thought, well, if we could get him to Skype in and tell us a few things, then that'd be great. Bruce is sort of, he knows a lot, and he's casual. And so if you have a question in the middle of it, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll get a microphone over to you, and we'll see if we can't get it. You can see that he can see a little bit of you. And periodically, his voice won't be in sync with his lips because of the internet. I think it must be the Canadian internet problem.
No, it's actually my ventriloquist.
Yeah. So having said that, I think I'll just turn it over to you, Bruce, and you can give us some intro and let us know when you want us to run the video, and we'll be on.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. I hope this works fine for you. And as Thomas said, if you do have a question or want to ask something, feel free to interrupt, and he'll try to arrange for me to be able to see you or to hear the question. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the initiation of inclusive post-secondary education in Alberta, and then bring you a bit up to date and show you a video. The video will probably provoke more questions and discussions from you. The way this began is I was working with a group of families in the mid-80s, mid-1980s. Hopefully you were all born by then, but I won't double check. They were families who had been activists as parents, mostly mothers actually, who had fought to see their kids leave segregated schools and be educated in special education classrooms in regular schools. In effect, at that time, we had very limited, fully inclusive education at elementary or high school levels. And as their sons and daughters were nearing the completion of high school, excuse me, as they were nearing the completion of high school, and the parents began to look at what their futures looked like, they became somewhat depressed by the limited possibilities. Day programs, sheltered workshops, great likelihood of being unemployed or underemployed, group home living. And this having fought for change and having seen their vision expand over time, they weren't satisfied with that as a life outcome. And I had been working on some new theories and ideas, which we may touch on a bit this afternoon, around how to create inclusive lives over a lifespan for people with intellectual disabilities, irrespective of the degree of disability. Introduce the concept to them of looking at what would be in effect normative or highly valued for other young people leaving high school. And our culture being somewhat similar to your own between Canada and the States, naturally having the opportunity to continue your education in college or university. Our systems are a little bit different, so I'll use the words interchangeably. Presents lots of promise and for people without intellectual disabilities, and why not look at that for people with intellectual disabilities? And so we had no models to follow. Nobody was doing this at the time, particularly in an elite academic, research-oriented university, which is at least how they would like to see themselves. Having no examples to follow, we needed both university and government funders to be willing to step out of their boxes, so to speak. There weren't policies, there weren't funding mechanisms, and essentially to allow and enable us to test out and create this possibility. Some of the ideas behind this were, if we could do inclusion, full inclusion in a university context, it would raise questions to some degree about where couldn't this be done. If we waited till we had a fully inclusive high school education, we'd still be waiting, at least in our country, given the fact that it isn't universally available yet for everyone with an intellectual disability. So in effect, we wanted to, arrogant as it sounds at the time, I guess, we wanted to step out a bit and test some ideas. Some of the other things that were important to us were to start with including those with would be characterized as the most severe or profound multiple disabilities. The practice until that point in time largely was that when you were trying new initiatives, you'd want them to be successful, so you'd try with those individuals who would be perceived at least as the most competent, build success, and then later you would try to accommodate those with more severe intellectual disabilities or multiple disabilities. And our experience was that those with multiple disabilities never in fact gained that opportunity. They always remained behind, and we felt we could probably learn more about how to facilitate inclusion and relationships and a sense of belonging and modify and adapt curriculum if we started with those who most challenged us from the very beginning. And that somewhat marks these initiatives differently than the way in which many others have since continued, if you want to develop. So just by way of example, because we didn't have at that time people chafing at the opportunity to have a post-secondary education. People didn't grow up in seeing that as a possibility. Families typically would limit dreams and not want to expose themselves to those ideas with the belief that these were impossibilities never to be realized. We had to seek people out and included individuals who had spent literally almost all of their lives into their mid-30s in institutional facilities. Some who had spent the last few years of their life actually confined to a bed, never had an education, had severe and multiple disabilities. So they were very much among the few that we included from the very beginning. And I think the fascinating part of this for us was, in fact, how well this worked. And so we have gone from that one initiative, which began in 1988. It took 4 years for the University of Calgary to be the second initiative. So it took some time for further initiatives, as we call them. We tend not to call them programs because the consequence of that is people tend to see a person with intellectual disability enrolled in a program rather than enrolled in in graphic design or healthcare or engineering or physical education. So the language we use, our jargon, is to call them initiatives. And in the last probably 10, 12 years is where we've begun to really see some significant growth. So there are 26 in our province, publicly funded post-secondary institutions, large, small, faith-based, secular, etc. By next year, 22 of those will be offering inclusive post-secondary opportunities to students with intellectual disabilities and multiple disabilities. And so far as I know, there isn't a comparable example of that degree of inclusion across a state, if you want, or a province, anywhere else in the world. So the video you're going to see was made about 6, 7 years ago. So the facts and figures are a bit out of date. So probably are the hairstyles and the glasses, but you'll cope with that, I'm sure. But it'll give you a much better idea of what we're talking about than my trying to describe it to you verbally. And if you just keep in mind, I think at the moment we have 20, we're working on 2 more, so we have 20 institutions doing this now. We're working on our next video. There are a little over 100 students being included at any one moment in time. And of course, because we've been doing this for a while, we'll talk later too about what the outcomes have been in addition to the experiences. One thing I'd ask you to keep in mind in this video, and it'll be even more evident in the second video when it comes out, is most people, when they discuss these topics, think about it in terms of what's the value and benefit for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And of course, there is value for them, and that's what we're hoping to achieve. What's quite striking in our reviews and evaluations of this across our province and in other parts of the world where we've helped this to evolve is the value that faculty in universities and students without disabilities attribute to having, as a result of having been included. And so you will hear some of that, and it's a good reminder about the fact that, in effect, inclusion benefits everyone, and many without disabilities will claim, in fact, they gain more from the experience, perhaps, than the person with a disability did. So I'll just stop for a moment before we show the video, just to see if there are any clarifying questions before we show the video, and then we can go into it.
Clarifying questions are good.
I presume there aren't, then. All right.
There might one come up. You got to give them a minute. Folks are shy, right? There must be a.
Okay, so why don't we show, dim the lights, hand out the popcorn, and show the video.
All right. All right, so we'll mute him and we'll start the video here in a second. And while it's coming up, you should know that Bruce, I talked to him about his fee, and once we agreed on what it was, he donated it to the program here. Nice guy.
This is the story of inclusive post-secondary education in Alberta, where more post-secondary institutions than anywhere else in the world are including students with developmental disabilities. It begins almost 20 years ago when the first initiative to include students in post-secondary academic and campus life began. For students and their families, what had previously been unimaginable was now a reality.
I knew something about colleges. I knew a group of families that were very disappointed in what the life outcomes looked like for their young adult sons and daughters, and wanted a very different life, a more enriched life, a life where, you know, dreams might come true. And so I helped them to establish the first inclusive post-secondary education opportunity at a university anywhere, and here in Alberta.
I had the good fortune of meeting a family who were very, very interested in having their son go to university. And he had a severe developmental disability, and they wanted him to attend U of C just as his brothers and sisters had done.
Students with developmental disabilities, including those with significant disabilities, are fully included in regular university and college faculties, programs, and courses. Students are supported by their peers, taught by class professors and instructors, and complete as much of the coursework as possible. Students also participate in social and recreational life of the campuses where they attend.
I would suggest to others if they want to go to college to do so, because it's a very good experience. You meet tons and lots of new people that you think you'd never be able to meet.
I think in the last 5 years, Chris's involvement with the team, the players on the team, the coaches, the boosters, assistant coaches, I believe that because he has made such a good impression on all of them with his personality, I think that he has made many good social connections, whether it be connections in the community for job opportunities. I think that it will vastly improve any life experience he wants to have in the future.
Today, there are 4 universities, 6 colleges, and 1 technical institute welcoming over 60 students with developmental disabilities into an amazing and growing array of courses, departments, and faculties. More than 70% of students with developmental disabilities who pursue an inclusive post-secondary education go on to have jobs and careers. Funding is provided to enable each post-secondary initiative to have a small complement of staff to facilitate inclusion on campus. It is likely that in the near future, every post-secondary institution in Alberta will offer inclusive post-secondary opportunities.
We support inclusive post-secondary education because post-secondary education is important, and it's important that as many people who can benefit from post-secondary education have the opportunity. And so we exist because our job is to give our students, and that means all of our students, as many opportunities to grow and to learn, to prepare themselves for the world ahead.
The notion of a university, and particularly one that's a provincial institution, is that it's supposed to serve the whole community in a lot of ways and not just enrich knowledge for a very small minority. And so what we do for the community in general, I think, is an important part of what we do and helps us meet that mission.
One of the most striking things about the development of inclusive post-secondary education is how receptive and responsive universities, colleges, faculty, and students have been. This stands in stark contrast to the challenges many parents still face in wanting their son or daughter with developmental disabilities to be included in elementary or secondary education.
When we asked many people, their first response was to say, well, gee, I hope I can be a good enough teacher, not to say, oh, they don't belong here. So it was quite dramatic how the early worries were not lived out at all by our actual experience.
For the most part, when the program's really working well, it's kind of invisible. It's because, you know, the students from the on-campus program are just blending in with everybody else. It's probably a bad sign when it's easy to notice, and a good sign when it seems like it's almost disappeared.
I almost now can't imagine what it would be like to have learning going on at Red Deer College without these people here participating with us, because they add so much to who we are.
What I found striking is how the instructors talk about how this has enriched the learning experience and has stimulated the learning experience for everyone in the classroom.
Each and every student with developmental disabilities pursues their own individualized course of studies. Support in the classroom is offered by their non-disabled peers. There is never a shortage of university or college students willing to support a student with developmental disabilities.
Working with Heather, she's kind of quiet, like she's opened up now, but this is towards the end of the semester. She was pretty reclusive at the start.
It's a chance for someone like Stephen to develop a different kind of relationship that they might not normally have had an opportunity to. I think it broadens them out in terms of not only the educational experience, but also, I think, broadens them out as a human being.
I've found like there's some stuff that I didn't know about that she's actually shown me. She has a job outside of school in an art store, and I'm assuming it might be through that or maybe from one of her other classes. She knew some stuff about painting and just how to mix paints that I had no idea what to do. So I get to learn from her as I guess I'm helping her.
I get support with my studying, my assignments, getting to know my peers in my class.
What kind of classes are we doing now? Music, yeah. And what's the other one? And we're doing that comparative literature class. Yeah.
If people are interested in participating in a class that I'm involved in, I see no reason to deny them that opportunity, because obviously there's an interest there on their part.
In groups like this, which have a high performance standard but a community aspect to them, I would say that this can enhance the sense of community within the group, because frankly the whole group is quite proud of Brian, and they always feel, whenever I mention his name and say, Brian, that was well done, they all shuffle their feet or clap. Building community within your ensemble is a fantastic thing, so I would strongly urge anyone who has the opportunity to do this. It's going to be just nothing but good for the ensemble.
Our involvement really is not that much, but what we get from it is just the realization that we're doing something to help somebody that makes that person feel really important part of what we do.
I mean, it's been a great opportunity not only for Chris. I mean, I know Chris loves it and has a great time, but we love Chris as well, you know, and so I think it's been mutually beneficial.
I'm going to go here at the college, and I love it. When I first came here, I was nervous, but after I started fitting in here, I started to love it here.
I like the way that the student comes into the classroom and then they're introduced so that the other students in the class know what's going on. All that is stated up front, so it's really not difficult for me to embrace this student just like I would any other student.
When I first started out at college, I was really excited. We would skate forward and backwards and practice and skills and a scrimmage.
The class absolutely loves having Steve in there. It's, you know, he's a delightful personality and he's very easy to get along with. He keeps things entertaining and upbeat, and the guys and the girls in the class react very well to him. Everybody's willing to help out. There was never a situation where there was always the same person helping him through the drills. I think it was a real positive experience for everybody.
He's there to learn, you know, he listens, and this is a good thing for everybody because, you know, disruptions in the class are uncalled for, and Steve hasn't ever disrupted our class. He's a positive influence on our class.
Students' experiences don't stop with academics. A big part of the post-secondary experience includes involvement in campus life outside of the classroom.
Steve is part of what they do on their free time, and if that isn't belonging, then I don't know what is.
He's got that positive aspect, and everyone is his friend, and everyone knows him, and just something you strive for. You know, everyone wants to be liked, and Steve is that guy.
Honestly, I've had opportunities to get to know people with disabilities in the past, but never been interested in it, not thinking they had really anything to offer me. Very selfish viewpoint, I know, but given the opportunity, I feel that I've learned a lot because Chris has a lot to offer. So it's been a great learning experience for me, and life experience even beyond gaining a friend.
I've had occasion to speak to students, faculty members, and all of them describe it as a learning experience and a growing experience, a maturing experience for everyone concerned.
All I could tell another parent is that it has the potential to change your child's life as well as your own life.
I never even graduated grade 12. So to see my son finish grade 12 and then go to college, it's very exciting. We're very proud. We're bragging all the time.
The story of inclusive post-secondary education is still being written. It is written by parents who speak from their heart about the meaning and value of inclusive post-secondary education, by faculty who describe how it adds to the richness of the college and university experience, and by students with developmental disabilities who are pursuing their dreams.
Crossing the stage was a really cool and great experience. I felt that the chair of my program was proud of me and my family was proud of me.
Convocation was a very rewarding, wonderful experience. We were so proud of her. It was just an experience of a lifetime that we never thought was possible for our daughter.
Well, we've always said people with developmental disabilities are limited, by our opinions and reflections on who they are. That Normally inclusive post-secondary education clearly challenged that. But in fact, I think it really challenges the whole idea of the nature of developmental disability.
Okay, thanks. I can actually hear it, so I just sitting here waiting. I'll share just maybe a few more overarching comments and then tell you a little bit more about how it actually unfolds and works in practice. When we started this, and still today, we wanted one of the key foundational elements to be about facilitating, enabling, and enabling relationships. So one might think that the first thing to concentrate on would be, learning or modifying, adapting curriculum instruction and exams, assignments, etc. But our means to achieving that actually was through building and facilitating relationships, particularly for the individuals with intellectual disabilities. And you would probably see from their video, their experiences aren't very different than your own, except they look like they're having more fun, probably. That they, just as I think one of the most pervasive experiences and persistent experiences for people with intellectual disabilities, in fact, is they can grow up with a heightened degree of loneliness in their lives, actually. Often maybe only family and sometimes only paid people to be there for them. And that's just an insufficient way if you want to exist as a human being. And for many of us who went through university and college, for example, what we remember most, what we take away from it, which is what has probably, shaped us to the greatest degree, actually, were our experiences and our relationships. We're more likely to have memories of those than the day maybe we solved our first calculus problem, for example. We're probably likely to have had experiences we haven't yet shared with our parents, which may not be true for you, but certainly still true for me. And so we wanted people to have a richness, a texture to their life that was deep and meaningful, and to help them, if you want, forge their sense of self and to have a positive identity, one that was not vested primarily in the nature of their disability, but in their talents, their passions, interests, and in their relationships. And through that, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth and possibility. And just by way of example, what the evidence shows is that those of us without those kind of challenges in our lives that come with intellectual disability, that the most effective or means by which we gain employment actually is through relationships in our networks. That, in fact, only a small proportion of jobs are actually advertised. So if you're not connected, if you're not in the know, if you don't have people to give you references, etc., you're disadvantaged even without an intellectual disability in seeking employment. And so we wanted people to be able to have the possibility of developing a network of relationships that would contribute not only to them having a fulfilling experience, but also to contributing to their employment. And just by way of outcome measures, the unemployment rate for people in our province with intellectual disabilities hovers between 70 to 80%. So in effect, you're almost destined for an impoverished life as a consequence of having intellectual disability. Over 25 years or more now, or 26 years of practice, the average rate of employment upon leaving inclusive post-secondary education is the reverse. 70 to 80% of those individuals go on to be employed. So we're literally turning the stats, if you want, as well as people's lives over end in a positive direction. And we have a number of other outcomes I can share with you as well. The way that it works, and we have evolved it somewhat over time and practice and institutions, is that a person with intellectual disability who wants to go to university, college, and we see that more and more with our work with individuals and families, that growing up, having at home, having more access to inclusive education in elementary and high school, more opportunity to participate in life and community, having a greater sense of identity that matches those without intellectual disabilities, they're hoping to go on to college or university as well. And as they develop these interests, and then they may apply to a college or university of their choosing, and they would identify where their curricular interests lie and apply to enter a specific program, faculty, department, program of studies, just as would be true for many of you in the room, most likely. And if you look at, for example, the calendar, if you want, of a university or college, and the range and depth of courses and activities and facilities if they have to offer, there's a tremendous breadth to them. And simply contrast that with the choices that people with intellectual disabilities are often given when they are at a young adult, the differences are, in most instances, quite phenomenal. The difference between, a day program, a sheltered workshop, or the 4 or 5 Fs, as we refer to them, where without thought, most people with intellectual disabilities end up working in food, filth, folding, flowers, etc., as if there's something about having intellectual disability that predisposes you to want to pursue those options. So by virtue of inclusive post-secondary education, we're offering people a range of choices outside of what many consider to be normative for people with intellectual disabilities that most of us just take for granted. We expect that to be part of our life course if we're going on to post-secondary. And so they will apply. And the essence of the process is to come as close as we can, and we have to strive to do that to varying degrees of success, to have a process that's as comparable, equivalent, and normative as would be true for a student without intellectual disability. So that's one of our constant benchmarks, if you want, or refrains, is the process for a student with intellectual disabilities as similar as humanly possible. And if not, we need to try to address that to a student without intellectual disabilities. And what this means when they apply to a university or college program, at least for some of them, there are limited seats in the room. There are only so many places in a lab, for example, only so many microscopes to be doing biology or botany in, for example. only so many machines to work on if you're in a technical institute. And so, in effect, the ethic of these universities and colleges is that they are setting aside, if you want, and accommodating, setting aside a space and accommodating a student with intellectual disabilities who can't compete academically to enter. They don't necessarily have high school credits, for example. They don't have the standing to competitively compete for one of those spots. And someone who could competitively compete, therefore, is not having that opportunity because there's limited space. So we're operating under an ethic, if you want, of equity, of creating space in our, at least post-secondary communities, for people with intellectual disabilities to learn alongside others, even though the means by which most enter is through a competitive academic process. So the faculty will interview students. They'll have each one of the campuses that this takes place on has, as you heard in the video, a small number of staff that are there to facilitate the process. So the faculty that are interviewing a student, maybe they don't know how to interview someone who doesn't speak very well or clearly, may not speak at all actually. They'll have that support to conduct that interview. They'll go through the process of considering if they want to admit the student, and then they'll make that decision accordingly. And just as is true for students without intellectual disabilities, there are many more people today applying to go to post-secondary and a limited number of opportunities for them to do so. So often the colleges, universities are selecting a much smaller number than the total number who are applying and anxious to have that chance, because it's literally life changing. And all of this is done voluntarily, if you want. There is, at least in the Canadian context, no right to a post-secondary education. Colleges and universities don't have to admit you. And so we're seeing an ethic, if you want, very different than we've experienced for 45 years almost in the practice of inclusive education. That is, post-secondary institutions have been far more accommodating, far more excited about the prospect, talk about it much more positively than is true for schools and regular classrooms. Once a student is admitted, then they often don't carry a full course load, which seems to be, I know that's certainly a trend in Canada. I'm not sure the States actually. Lots of people have to work part-time to support themselves while they're going to university and college. That's true for a good number of students with intellectual disabilities. They take their courses. We assist the professors and faculty in modifying and adapting curriculum and assignments. They hand in their assignments, they get marked, they get feedback, they participate in group projects, they learn together, they participate in student union activities. We actually have a student who's now been on the board of a student union, actually. Whatever the richness of the campus life is, all of that is opened up to them. And the support to participate primarily comes from their non-disabled peers. Only those students with multiple disabilities who need a personal care attendant would have somebody with them, as might be true for somebody with a physical disability and who needs that kind of personal care support. What we do is support the students without disabilities and the faculty to be able to accommodate the student with intellectual disabilities. And so, unlike what you might see in a classroom where you'd have, an aide assigned to a student, for example, that's not the model we use in inclusive post-secondary education to a very large degree, except for people with really severe and multiple disabilities who don't have ordinary means of communication. And so they go through If it's a 3 or 4 or 5 year program, they're at university or college for a comparable length of time, often a little bit longer because they're not taking as many courses. Students don't necessarily take courses for credit because they can't necessarily do the academic work. If they can, they may take it for credit. They may take it a second time where they could get credit, but what they amass is a portfolio of their skills, their knowledge, their experiences, their references, etc., so that when they leave and complete their studies, they have this bank of materials to testify to their competencies in seeking employment. The students are supported during the summer to actually have employment. So they are, those summer jobs are sometimes in their field of studies and often they're not. And when they leave, their employment might be in their field of study or not. And in fact, the range of experience today after 25 plus years of practice is no different than the range of experience for students without disabilities. Part-time, full-time, leave for a while, come back, a university college isn't for them, change their course of study, go to one college university, decide another is better for them, live in residence, don't live in residence, live with friends, don't live with friends. We have exactly the same breadth of experience as would be true for any of you in the room or the thousands that might be on campus. So I can keep talking, actually, which would be likely to put, given the hour of the day there, more and more of you to sleep. So I'll take a breath for a moment and see if if I've provoked any thoughts or questions or comments from you before we go deeper into the subject. Do a little product placement.
Yeah, that's it. What'd you put up? Well, you did it too quick. We didn't see what it was. Geez, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, questions? Come on, he's going to keep talking unless you ask him something. I mean, he's talking about folks with intellectual disabilities, maybe even significant disabilities, going to class side by side with you. In your classes. Oh, wait, would you do me a favor? Model this. Would you walk up here? Would you please? Because then Bruce could see you, and, and he can hear you, and we'll just sit here together. Oh, I don't. If you're dumb, he'll pretend it's smart. Here.
Oh, they're really putting up front. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, I hope I didn't miss this in what you were saying. But in terms of universities not agreeing to a program, because I don't think does every university have this program? I don't think so. So, in terms of universities rejecting the program to do something like this, is that?
Yeah. Okay, so if I've understood the question correctly, you're asking if every one of them does this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I understood that not every university does this, so some have to say, have to deny the program. So in terms of universities not picking up the program, why wouldn't they want to take part in something this great?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have, over the 20 plus years we've been doing this, we have had one university not agree to do this. The rate of growth has mostly been confined by our capacity to obtain the funding for the supports on campus, to be able to assure quality of practice across campuses and to extend it across the country as well. So the rate of growth is much more limited by our capacity to support growth than it is by the willingness of post-secondary institutions to take it on. And today it's so highlighted, if you want, in our provinces. We've got lots of international recognition for the province, etc., that we do have universities and colleges coming to us to saying when could they be next, when could they join their colleagues, because when the VP academics, vice presidents of academics get together and the presidents get together and meet with our politicians, they're talking about this because it's at enough campuses now that those that don't have it look a little bit odd. But we do sometimes have, so the reasons why people haven't sometimes agreed, like individual faculty, for example, is they feel it might jeopardize academic integrity, might lower the standards, for example, might detract from others who are, their very future and careers depend on their success academically, and feel that they may not have the skills or abilities or time to include somebody. So the advantage we gain over time now is that the faculty and administrators and presidents and board of governors are so positive about this now from the experience, it's easy for us to get them to talk to others. In other words, one point in time, I might have to sell it. But now we can have one university or college sell it to another. And so it works much better if the registrar is saying, I figured out how to do this. Here's what we did. So you can figure out how to do that on your campus. And so, I still think there will be occasions where somebody's reluctant to do this. They think it would somehow detract. I'd add one more thing. We seem to have gained some ground as well because of maybe the cultural interest or societal interest in supporting diversity to a greater degree. So the diversity movement among, whether it's visible minorities or with respect to gay community or lesbian, bi, and transsexual community, all of that has, I think, contributed to an ethic where we can say you also need to recognize this as part of diversity as well.
The student helpers that help the students with disabilities, are they students that are like designated specifically from the class, or are they just volunteers? That's my last question.
All right. Yeah, those are good questions. Thank you. Initially, there'll be a request typically from the class to see if there's anybody to be willing to support a student. So just as you might have a student with, physical or sensory disabilities seeking a note taker, for example, we would seek someone to assist a student with intellectual disabilities to find their way around campus, for example, to be part of a study group, etc. And so the initial requests come like that. Gradually, because they're there for a number of years, that drops off. People are part of a cohort of students that they're studying with, learning with, moving through college with. And so gradually they form their own relationships. Some of those volunteers may or may not turn into friends. We're not trying to turn them into friends. Friendships will arise through multiple contexts in which people are actually engaged. We, as you would expect, never have a shortage of people willing to volunteer. So usually we have to say no to people. And now, in fact, on those campuses that have been doing this for a long time, the faculty know how to do that. We don't have to go into a class and do that. The professor will say, I have a student this year who needs a little bit extra support. And is there anybody willing to assist and provide extra support for that student? And then that person who is volunteering may get a little support in addition from us. If they want to understand a few more things about the nature of the disability, some of the challenges they may be encountering, how this person learns best, etc. I'll just expand a little bit because we tried a new idea. We're excited about this and may thoroughly bore the rest of you, but where we had a new idea, applied for some funding, so we're happy to have achieved that. And we approached 2 universities to see if they would have faculty who would want to go through a staff development program with us on how to include students with intellectual disabilities in their classrooms in their course of studies. We had 11, I think, faculty from 2 universities go through that staff development process. As a result, those institutions are now accommodating more students without us having to have more staff on campus. And those faculty are now mentoring and supporting other faculty on campus. The interesting thing, and this process required approval of the presidents, et cetera, but the interesting thing for us is that all of the faculty reported how this assisted them in being able to be better teachers for all their students. And so the feedback was highly, very positive, result of which is we now have other universities this year who want to have their faculty go through this staff development process. We have funding for this year and 1 more year at least to increase, in effect, the capacity of the institutions to include people to a greater degree, and not necessarily with additional resources on campus. So is this like the,
he's coming
the
up.
walk of fame?
We got another one.
Okay. I know it might be awkward to come up to the front, but I really appreciate it, actually.
So they talked about this a little bit in the video, but how about like residential life? If they're living on campus, do you guys work on making accommodations with that, with like their housing and who they'd be rooming with?
Yeah, Alberta is still a fairly, it has 2 major urban population centers and then still a lot of rural farming communities. So lots of people will leave their communities to go to university and college. There are not enough of them in enough rural environments. And so we have had students in campus, in dorms, in residence, rooming with people, etc. And again, the range of experience isn't unusual. We do work with the, I forget the terms that different universities have, but whether it's residence managers or floor leaders or whatever it is, we work with them to support and accommodate the students, answer questions. Things come up that are unanticipated, haven't been expected. People are going out to a club that a student with intellectual disabilities hasn't been exposed to before, for example, doesn't quite know how to behave, tells their parents about it. We get, while the rest of you would know I'm not going to tell my parents, that isn't necessarily always true here. So I have a variety of issues that could be around privacy and ownership of property. And generally it works quite well. There have been times where students come from a community and been homesick, wanted to go back, where a residence life was too hectic and overwhelming, and a smaller rooming with a couple of others. We had a student that roomed, I think, with 5 or 6 other guys. That seems to me would be hard for any human being, but nevertheless, it worked for them. And actually, they went on post-schooling to room together with just one of the other people they roomed with. So it's, I'm not sure I can be particularly, identify any great significance, because the range, if you want, of possibility hasn't been significantly different. Things do come up, problems do arise, and we have to try to solve them. Like others, people want personal, intimate relationships. We do have a striking number of students that have been inclusive post-secondary who are married now, actually, or living with someone. Again, they are in an environment now that they may not have been in previously, where they have to learn about the rules of engagement, so to speak. And so you have to facilitate that, whether it's in residence or on campus or in after-hours environments.
Thanks. Anybody else?
So this is just kind of like a two-part question. So the first part, so I think you mentioned this, so they don't necessarily get degrees, they just build portfolios which would then help them get jobs or careers later on. Is that correct?
Yes. They do convocate. The institutions have typically developed their own form of recognition. So they will be part of student convocation exercises, the gowns. These have all required finessing at times because I was unaware of all the rules about colors and gowns and so on and so forth, and who gets to cross the stage and who doesn't. And so we've worked all of that out. And so they have that experience, but no, they don't. Rarely would they get a degree having gotten credit for a sufficient number of courses in an area of study, but they would get a form of recognition in addition to the experience, applause, and cheers. And so we haven't figured out, and I'm not sure we want, this is a debate that comes up regularly, whether we'd want a separate award, if you want, for people with intellectual disabilities. But that is, if you want, an unresolved question on the minds of many. Different people have made, in different parts of the world, different decisions about that.
Okay, cool. And then the second part of my question is, so based on that, then they wouldn't, I don't know how to say this, follow exactly like a track that you would follow to get that degree. They could more pick and choose which classes like interest them or would be beneficial to their like learning. Is that?
Yeah,
yeah, kind
to
of.
some, it varies a bit. So they would be trying to, take the prerequisites, then the next level of courses, and the next level of courses, etc. They may not be taking as many of them as others might be, who can handle the academic load, but they would be as much as we can, and it's pretty decent, but not always. None of this is perfect. You're always working at it. They would be then with a cohort of people who are moving through. And because today we find, again, I don't know if the experience is universal, many students taking longer than the prescribed years. If they take 5 years for a 4-degree course, there's still lots of students that they're part of a cohort with. Right, that hasn't been a significant issue for us. It's a bit more of an issue in colleges where there are very short-term defined programs, maybe 2 or 3 year career training programs. And the expectation is that you march along with everybody else. And they'll still march along with everybody else. But if they need an additional year, there might be a little less of a cohort available to them in those contexts. The other thing I might add, while Thomas seeks another questioner, is that the faculty themselves who help the students find jobs. So it's been another unanticipated, if you want, experience has been faculty who will reach out through their connections and networks to recommend students, have them find a job. We have other initiatives that help people get jobs. We just had a student who studied healthcare technician at a college in Calgary. I can tell you this because no one's listening because it hasn't been announced publicly, so you just can't tweet it or Facebook it at the moment. She's about to be hired at a $40,000 a year job. We have not had somebody at that rate of pay yet. Full-time, $40,000 a year job. We have people who work in this field who start at that rate of pay, actually, who don't have intellectual disabilities. So that's fairly, now it's not common, but it is exciting, just as you've admitted your first student, to see somebody, again, a student breaks a barrier, and it encourages others to pursue that.
So speaking of breaking a barrier, I got a question that might take you a little while to answer, maybe. It's actually two parts. So, because in the video, you said that it challenges the very nature of developmental disability. Oh, Michael. Uh-oh. Mike. Oh. Help.
Sorry, Thomas, it cut out just as you were starting to ask your question.
Yeah.
It must be programmed that way.
Yeah, yeah, right. I think you hit the button, man. Okay, so so in the video, you said that what you do challenges the very nature of developmental disability.
Losing you again.
Did you lose me again? I hate it when that happens.
Okay, can you start again? Sorry,
Sure.
it hung up again for a minute.
Okay, so in the video, you said that what you do challenges the very nature of developmental disability. And so the first question is sort of say more about that. But then the second part of the question is, what does that have to do with increasing the likelihood of equality for all of us? Did you get those two parts?
Yeah, I'll try, but if I've missed the essence of your question, feel free to engage me further.
Okay, go ahead.
I think, of course, maybe that's less so today, but when we started at least, and I think still, to a significant degree today, people, when they see or know someone has a significant intellectual disability, make all kinds of assumptions about their place in society, what their value is to us, what their competencies are, what they might be able to learn, how they can make a difference in the world. And the striking way this comes home to me is I do a lot of talking to parents of really young children, 2, 3, 1 years of age, who have been identified as having a significant disability. And when I talk about, or they meet some young people or families that have had the experience of inclusive post-secondary education, you can see for many of them that they hadn't even realized unconsciously they'd begun at that age to limit the futures of their sons and daughters, that they had removed, if you want, from their dreams, these kind of possibilities, and probably others that we weren't talking about at the moment. And it's quite an awakening for families to know that this child who they love deeply and passionately, that they've already begun to set them on a life course that's going to limit their futures. So it's not necessarily at all the nature of the disability that's limiting people. It's the perceptions, and in some instances, it's our lack of imagination. That, these ideas, when we started them, were beyond most people's imagination. People thought we were crazy to try this. It was absurd, even some of my best friends. And so I think when people have these intimate experiences as faculty and peers, and and you hear them express how they've been impacted, how they've made a friend for life, as you'll hear in the video, right? How they've seen somebody, challenge the odds against them. When they've been afraid to speak up in class or to try something and they've seen somebody else with more challenge do that, how they've been inspired by it. So there's so many different ways that this environment, if you want, allows people with intellectual disabilities to excel. It's a bit cliched, but people will use the term blossom almost, to explode out. And when in so many other contexts, we've been imposing limitations on them, whether it's in the regular classroom or not knowing how to facilitate their inclusion in competitive community sports, and retreating to Special Olympics, etc. This is us doing that to them, not who they are. And so, and by doing it in an environment that most people think is difficult to do it in, it also raises people's, vision and consciousness. And I think what you'll hear people say, whether it's in the workplace or the classroom, is that they've learned more about themselves. They've learned more about how to accept differences among themselves. They've learned more how to support each other. Hardly anybody can do their job actually without support. I certainly need that in my job, and probably people think I get too much of it anyway. But nevertheless, we'll hear people say the presence and inclusion of this individual changes them and changes the culture of the classroom and their workplace. What's been a challenging question is why this hasn't been as true for elementary and high school education. So there's been a great difference for us where we still fight to get kids into high school classes. We still have teachers saying, I don't know how to teach science to this student or social studies or language arts, where we still get the teachers union complaining about inclusion, etc. We're, by stepping into a very different culture where we didn't have to dismantle any segregation, we didn't have to remove any special education. We had to stay away from it where it was being taught sometimes. But I think that allowed us to explore things in a very different way and illustrates how much of the environmental context of other people's perceptions was defining intellectual disability rather than the other way around. So that's a long-winded answer, but I hope it even addressed the question to some degree.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. It's exactly what I was looking for. And we're just about out of time, but I want to see if anybody has any burning questions for Bruce before we let him go back. There must be more curiosity in the room than this.
Well, I have one question.
Okay.
Okay. What happened with those midterm elections?
What elections were those? Did we have some elections recently? What are you speaking of? I have an answer for that, but it'd probably be best in private over a beer, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, we just got to observe the phenomenon from up north here. I'd say one more thing in the terms of the time. We've had lots of inquiries from the States, and we do work across Canada and other countries, and we've had probably more challenges with the United States, if you want, universities and colleges in doing full inclusion than many other jurisdictions. And so we've had lots of conversations with colleagues, but many of the US programs are not oriented to full inclusion, but to partial inclusion. Right. And so that's been, sort of a sociological phenomenon, if you want, that we haven't quite peeled apart sufficiently. So many of our US colleagues will say we're much further ahead of them, and we'll simply say, whether you do it this way or not is actually up to you. It has nothing to do with the institution or the individuals. It's the choice that was made in terms of the programmatic structure that's being implemented. And so that is an ongoing debate, and discussion between us.
Yeah, and I know, of course I agree with you, of course, because so there's really no debate at all, and that, because here we're doing the same thing you did. Our mantra is the culturally valued analog, right? So it's like everybody else, and when we go around, I was asked this summer when I was having many meetings with lots of people throughout the university, a dean got me in his office and said, what do you hope to accomplish with this program? And I said, you run all, and I named the programs that this person runs. What do you hope to accomplish? He sort of sat back and he said, oh, I see. So it's like everybody else, right? We're just going to do it like everybody else.
Yeah. It is helpful to families when they do have meetings at the school level to be able to say, I want my child included in high school because this sets the stage for university inclusion.
Yes.
Right, and to show the video.
Yeah, and
the video is very helpful.
The student that we have is actually dual enrolled, so the local school district is actually paying his tuition, which is very cool. So I'm sorry we got to let you go because I'd like to keep chatting, but I really appreciate your generosity with us, Bruce, and it's been just great. Any closing thoughts or shots?
I guess the only closing thoughts would be, looking out at a bit at the sea of faces. It's kind of hard to see everybody. Is that the more we have, the more we have individual students like yourselves saying, we want to see this on our campus, it's much easier for us to move forward than if we're always having to push our way in. So creating the space, creating the invitation really helps to lift a weight off individuals and families, creates a sense of hope and promise. And so you can make a difference by being willing and open and inviting to students with intellectual disabilities on your campuses.
That's great, Bruce. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks very much.
See you later.